This lecture is somewhat of a discontinuity. We're kind of in the middle of talking about the reaction to the big industrial immigration of the early 20th century. Remember, we talked about scientific racism last time. We're going to move then into politics after the break. But we're taking a break before the break from the main flow of things in order to talk about issues that impact Lab 3. We're staying in the same era. We're still talking about the early 20th century, 1910 and thereabouts. But I just want to keep you confused because when we come back after the break, we're going to pick up where we left off on Wednesday. Right? So as far as the lab is concerned, the points that we'll touch on today is that there's kind of a spectrum. And Bodner doesn't talk in terms of spectrum, but he does. I think he's constant with this idea that on the one hand we have individualism. This is a modern, in our way we use the term modern now, sense. This is individuals looking out for their own good. Families in this context like to educate their children. Right? Opposite of that is an idea of a pre-modern family, one in which the family is designed as a unit to hold property, and the goals and aspirations of individuals are subordinate to that of the family. And what you expect, if families behave that way, is for students or children to leave school early and go to work. And in the early 20th century, that's very possible. This is before the high school movement, so there is compulsory education only through elementary school for the most part, although that's going to vary from state to state. But your data then looks at children. It's a snapshot of children in time, and you're going to look at these kinds of rates, whether children are likely to be in school or not likely to be in school. Now, as we'll talk about Bodner in a second, this lab is a little bit less clean in a sense than the Chinese lab. Lab 2, everybody knows the Chinese were isolated. There was no doubt about that. You just had to sort of find out how they were isolated, find an interesting angle on their isolation. In this case, if you've read Bodner, you know that he's not telling us that, hey, immigrants are all this way. He's telling us that all immigrant families are kind of on this spectrum, if you will, in different places. Individual families find different places. They adapt in different ways. And there are some patterns, perhaps, across ethnicities. Now, Bodner only talks about a few ethnicities. We have many more in our sample. He's talking only about Pittsburgh. We're talking about the whole U.S. So what I'm saying here is be prepared to find anything. It may turn out that immigrants invest more. Some immigrant groups are investing more in their children than, say, Native Americans. You may find out all kinds of different things. It's not like the Chinese lab in that we know the outcome. So for the most part, I think the story is clear that immigrants were more likely to be of that pre-modern set, but we're all individuals. So okay, that's the message. Now, this lecture will cover a little bit beyond the one issue of school enrollment or home leaving, the kinds of things you can look at in the data. But it's all of the same message. It's what happened to immigrant families when they arrived in the industrial America of the early 20th century. All right? Just a moment. The main points are that immigrants adapted. Immigrants adapted to conditions in early 20th century America in ways that were shaped by their homeland background, as well as by the new urban industrial environments. Right? So families aren't rigid static units that just continue to always behave in the same way. It's a complicated unit, and when they show up in America, they will do different things. Nonetheless, we expect that there will be some effect of their homeland, of their background. And as I said, in a lab, you're going to see evidence in census data of the different roles of children. Right? When we were talking about investment of children, but let's make it broader, the role of children. Right? Outline, then, the way we'll do it, we'll talk about how immigrants adapted. And we'll break it into three different categories, although these categories are a little bit overlapping. We'll talk about how individuals, briefly about how individuals adapted, then families. This is mainly the point, of course, of the lab. But then I hope to get past that and talk a little bit about networks, about chain migration and employment networks, ethnic enclaves, nationality, as a point I left off here, how development of nationality consciousness, and political machines. All right, I hope we get through that. But before we can start, I would like to talk a little about Bodner. I assume that everybody has read it because, as I said, you are the good students for being here, right? Nervous shifting about. I would like to talk about these questions. Right? So, first question, in Bodner, the chapter in Bodner, you read, does he tell us that immigrant families support or diminish individual attainment? I kind of hinted at what I think the answer is, but what do you think? You've read it. Yes. Now would be a good time to start reading. All right. Anyone want to take a stab at this? What's that? Support. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Support, yes. I think the answer is certainly families who support. What were some examples of families supporting individual attainment? Do you recall any? Okay. Well, I'm going to have to do some of this myself, apparently. I think the story, when you read it, I think you'll get the sense. I put this here to make the point that I already made, that there's a lot of differences. Bodner talks about different kinds of families with different sorts of strategies. He points out, for example, that Italians are very different from blacks. His comparison, is between blacks who have both northern blacks who were born in the Pittsburgh area, as well as blacks who recently migrated from the south, which is an important, interesting story that we probably won't have a lot of time to talk about. But he compares these two, and in Bodner's story, blacks are much more individualistic. He'll tell us that the blacks who he interviews, this is all based on oral history, do not get a lot of support from their families and don't give a lot of support to their families. They're much more on their own. The reasons for this are interesting. They have something to do with prejudice, right? If you are black in Pittsburgh in 1910, it's not easy to find a job. Once you do find a job, you're not as likely, according to Bodner, as immigrants are, and I'll show you data on this later, to be able to help your friends get jobs. Right? We're going to talk about job networks, and you'll see what we mean by that. But the fact that blacks in Pittsburgh in this period cannot help each other get jobs, they cannot help their children get jobs, it means that the role of the family is different. Right? Okay? And so in the case of Poles, for example, Poles find work in the metal industries and steel industries that are going like crazy in Pittsburgh at this time, and they can generally get their friends who are immigrating into their department where they can get their children, and that's a very different role, leads to different kinds of outcomes. He also, I guess we sort of answered the second bullet point here. The third one is also interesting about women. Bodner tells us that it is unusual for married immigrant women to work outside of the house, outside the household. It's very common, on the other hand, for married black women to work outside of the household. But what immigrant women do instead is boarding house. They have boarding houses. They They take in boarders, usually single men who are labor migrants from their own country, come and live and eat in their house. And this is a way that women can make money, but it also promotes this idea of network beyond the family that we talked about. All right, I'm going to move on because this discussion wasn't really as successful as I kind of hoped it might be. Individual adaptations, there were many, and this is perhaps not the best example of some of the individual adaptations. This is a piece from the Ford Times. We talked about the Ford sociology department. But the point I really want to make with this is the kinds of adaptations people had to make to factory life were pretty significant. It was very, very regimented, especially if you're coming from a rural area. It's very difficult to adjust from a sort of sun up to sundown, work at your own pace, just keep working kind of life to working with machines. And this is one of the ways that Ford tried to help that, was to teach them about the gospel of work and how important work was. He had to motivate this. It's such an artificial setting in a factory. These people who are certainly used to working, but working outdoors on land that you own or you have a stake in the outcome, it's a little different working in a factory. There are also numerous religious adaptations. This is an example from Abraham Tahan, who writes a book called Rise of David Levinsky, very much an autobiography. And here's just an example that he makes of how Orthodox Judaism is very difficult to maintain in an industrial setting. But it's not. It's certainly not only Jews. Eastern Orthodox and other workers also had lots of traditions that needed to be modified. Polish weddings, for example, lasted many, many days by tradition, but you couldn't do that in this new industrial setting. Of course, various Italian villages all had various festivals that fell on whatever day they fell on, and those too had to be changed, either moved or abandoned in order to adopt to the calendar that the factory imposed on people. And of course, everybody worked on Saturday, so the Jewish Sabbath was a big problem as well. And to some extent, I think these individual adaptations are not as important as the family ones. And in the interest of time, I'm going to skip a little bit ahead here. I think we talked about these things already. The main point here is that immigration is a family adaptation, that families in the old country, the pre-industrial families, if you will, are really economic units, that they really are not so much in the industrial world. So let's see. So here's a picture of a pre-industrial family operating in an industrial setting. Similar picture here. Everybody's working together, as you can see. So in addition to this main idea of the lab, this notion that families, as they come to America, need to make peace with the new individualism that's prevalent here. There are other family adaptations too, and one of them is fertility. We've talked about the demographic transition. We talked about in the context of Francis Walker's piece that fertility in the U.S. has been, by this time, declining for over 100 years. It's much lower in 1900 than it was in 1800. And this has a lot to say about this investment in children concept, right? Individual children, children in general may be less valuable in an industrial setting, but than in an agricultural one. But individual children may be more valuable by virtue of their scarceness. The fertility decline was much slower, I should say, in coming to immigrant women. At this time, by survey data, we know that Italian women in 1900 had an average completed fertility of 11, and Polish women 7.8. I'm not sure. I don't believe that's national data. And these numbers are going to be overstated because they're retrospective. This is asking women who are already past childbearing age in 1900 how many children they had. Going forward, that's not an indication that going forward that young Italian women in 1900 would be on course to have 11 children. All right, do you understand what I mean? But it's still evidence of really high fertility, very high fertility by the standards even of this period. Yeah, it is. It's huge. It's essentially a non-contracepting population. It makes me quite certain that it's not a national sample, and it may include children who did not survive. It surely includes children who didn't survive as well. But yeah, those are very, very high numbers. And that's the point. Immigrant fertility is higher. Just as today, it's higher than that before. Yes. This would be very hard to say because we're talking here about women who were born in Italy and immigrated. So different places, different probabilities, and of course immigrants are a selected sample. We really can't answer that question, but certainly not all of them. If we're talking about women who were, say, 50 in 1900, they would have been born in 1850. Mortality would have been quite significant. For mortality in Italy in the later 19th century would have been certainly considerable. But poverty was another factor. Packing house workers, there's just some data that show, and Bodner talks about this kind of data as well, that full-time earnings of unskilled laborers in this period just didn't feed family. Just wasn't going to happen. So you had to have support from the children, and children did. There's further evidence that excess of half of family income in some settings came from children this time, which again is quite high. This is a quote directly from Bodner that speaks to the attitude. We look forward to a time when we got to legal age. When we got to that point, we quit school and got a job because we knew that parents needed money. And you'll see that when you read Bodner a second time. And again, this is a quote that he juxtaposes with other quotes from other people. This is the Poles in his study are the extreme example. They have very authoritarian families, and this is what they do. This is not necessarily the case for other kids in other ethnicities. And that, again, is what we'll hopefully discover somewhat in the lab. Again, we might pass this kind of quickly. Some of the evidence that we use to see what another kind of evidence that tells us about immigrants pursuing a more of a pre-modern, less individualistic path is home ownership. Working class immigrants, for example, in Detroit had higher home ownership rates than middle class native born. Right? And what that's telling us is that these people are saving, right? We know their incomes are low, but we know that they're choosing effectively to invest in housing in real estate rather than in education. In order to get the money to buy the house the children clearly go to school, at least in higher numbers than other people, right? So this is an example then of how that strategy can work. In this case, in these working class immigrants in Detroit, they wind up with a house, and that's an asset that they can pass on to their children, right? If the children had gone to school, they wouldn't have a house to inherit. But on the other hand, there are other investments that were better, and certainly, as we'll see in a bit, education was a much better investment than housing at this time. Education was going to raise your lifetime earnings a lot more, and you know that because you're here. Yes. No, it was not necessary for voting. It was this was simply an asset, and it follows very much the same cultural norms that we talked about in Italian immigrants. This drive to own houses or own property is very salient, and this is simply a way that you can see it in the data. This is clearly investing in a household property, and if we had the data, I'm sure we could find evidence in small businesses as well. Anyway, Bodner, I don't think Bodner talks in this chapter about home ownership, but it's something to keep in mind. Getting closer now to the lab, there's some data on how often children stayed in school. This is from the 15th census. Okay, so this is national data, and it's from 1910, 20, and 30. And so if we look at the top block, 1910, this is the stuff we're working with, essentially. We should be able to reproduce these numbers at least roughly. The top line here is native white parents. So this would be your third generation U.S. white in the data set. And of these various age groups, we can see there's not a huge difference between the natives foreign-born in 7 to 13. Right? These are elementary school ages. Not a lot of difference there. But as you go across, the differences get pretty severe in the 16 to 17 age group we're talking about, which is high school. Much higher rates for native white native parents, 51% versus 18% here of foreign-born. Right? So in your data, we break down the groups much more finely than this. So we're not talking just about foreign-born. And this is important, as we're saying, be ready to find different things in the data. If you lump together the foreign-born, I'm sure you'll reproduce this kind of finding. But by disaggregating the foreign-born, we may find differences. You may find some groups among the foreign-born have much higher. You will find some will have higher rates than others. But note then also that there's a very steep drop-off there in terms of age. Yes?
So at this time, do you teach 20 that corresponds to post-high school?
I believe that would correspond to post-high school, although there's a lot of delays here. A lot of people in the higher ages, especially among immigrants and non-immigrant children, are not in the grade that they're expected to be in. They help people back more than would be customary today. So I wouldn't assume that everybody in the 18 to 20 category is out of high school or even in high school necessarily. College was pretty rare in 1910. I don't have the numbers before me, but I would think around 10% would be a high-end estimate of what fraction actually went to college. So I don't think, certainly 20% is way too many for college graduates. Okay, now to make things complicated, we have to ask, did education really matter? This is a graph from a student in a lab that we used to do in here, and it's a little hard to follow, but we have time. We observed people at 2 points in time, so census data in the U.S., and we're looking at people who were born between 1890 and 1900, so it's a 10-year period, and we look at them in 1920. So in 1920, people who were born between 1890 and 1900 are 20 to 30 years old. Right? So they're young adults, as it were. And then we look at them 20 years later, more or less end of career. And we're looking at a measure of upward mobility, which is the proportion of workers who are in white-collar jobs. And the way white-collar is defined is by going through a list of occupations like you saw in the second lab and deciding which ones were. And the thing that makes this graph a little tricky is that farmers are not white-collar. But obviously some farmers are prosperous, and so you might want to include them in this particular graph. You did not. But that's what lowers the bars for for German immigrants, second generation, and also for USA white. But another thing to note is that everybody represented in this graph was born in 1890 to 1900. So the first generation Italians are not the parents of the second generation Italians. There's not a generational transmission thing going on here. This is the same point in time. Right? So second generation Italians in this period are the children of people, first generation Italians who are 30 years older, migrated much sooner. Okay, so with that said, the pattern that I want you to notice is that, for the most part, the higher the intercept, the higher the slope. So there's a sense that those ethnic groups that start who are between age 20 and 30 and 1920, who are already in white-collar professions, those groups which have a lot of white-collar professions tend to gain them faster than those who don't. Now, you'll also notice that these groups, this group which is labeled Russian, are overwhelmingly Jewish. In this period, certainly the second generation, overwhelmingly, first generation as well. This is the people who migrated in this period from Russia are overwhelmingly, though not entirely, Jewish. So in our data, we look at language rather than birthplace to determine who's what. We can see that they're doing better, even from the start, they're better off